welcome everyone. Thanks for coming down. I'm going to try and make this professional. So yeah, obviously first week we went through mindset stuff. Second week we went through breathing mechanics. So the next point of sort of consideration, I guess, when we're trying to get our health is nutrition. So with nutrition, what we're going to be really talking about today is going through a bit of a hierarchy system in terms of what to focus on when you're trying to optimize body composition and when you're trying to optimize your health as well, and how much they go hand in hand versus not going hand in hand. We're going to go through a bit of a debunking of some myths. Okay, there's a lot of contradictory information out there, and that's a lot of the reason why when people come to us, they don't know what to do, because they look over here, there's something that says do this over here, and there's another thing that says do this over here, and it's knowing what is based on science, what is based on someone trying to sell something, but then there's the art of learning what your body needs as well, because there's a very big individual component to nutrition as well. So you have all the science in the world, but then there's an individual component that you need to find a halfway point for you. So what I want you to get out of today really is understanding some principles, so you can put those principles into play. Okay? Because if we understand the principles, then we can disregard the stuff that doesn't work or that is bullshit, and we can start getting a bit more in tune with our body and trust the process a little bit more, rather than trying to jump from one thought process to the other when something doesn't work in the first week. Okay, so that's sort of what I want to get out of today, but also just I'm going to have some time at the end to answer any questions, and also along the way. Okay, so I want this to be as interactive as we can be, because if you have a question, most likely the other person's, the old saying, another person has the same question or whatever, it will help out as well. So that's sort of what today's going to be about. Let's see if I can work this part now at least. I actually don't know how to do this part. So what we're going to sort of focus on to start off with is we need to understand what, so I've called it fat loss, okay? But it's basically that when I say fat loss, we can talk about it in terms of optimizing body composition. It's probably a less aggressive way to say it. So we need to understand what that is. So what it's not just scale weight, okay? So there's a big difference in terms of just losing weight on the scale versus losing body fat, okay? Because obviously the scale takes into account all the other tissues as well, apart from just body fat. So in terms of walking around feeling good in your body, obviously everyone has individual wants and needs based on whatever their preconceived ideas are, but generally body composition, so the makeup of fat versus muscle, is what is for the majority the biggest determinant in terms of how you're feeling about yourself, how your clothes are fitting as well, and then definitely your performance, however you want to look at performance, whether it's getting through life, whether it's hitting milestones in the gym or whatever it is. But the biggest thing is actual composition, okay? So not just scale weight. So when I say the thermogenic equation, okay, it's a very simple equation. Well, very simple on paper, which you all would have heard of, okay? Calories in versus calories out. So there has been studies, like thousands and thousands of studies, okay, showing that calories in versus calories out matter. There's other things that come into the equation, which we'll touch on today as well. But most of the time, okay, it's going to come down to that. But there's a lot of problems with that, okay? And one of them is the power of food in the equation. Okay, what I mean by that is, if we go and jump on an assault bike right now and you work your ass off for 5 minutes, okay, you might burn, most of you in here it's probably going to show up as 50 calories on the bike. 50 calories, that's 5 minutes of busting your ass. How quickly can you eat 50 calories? That's half a banana. Okay, you can inhale that in 10 seconds. So it's a dynamic equation, and it's not always like as simple as just calories in versus calories out, because we all know that. The whole population knows that. So why is there still a weight problem? Why is there still an obesity problem, okay, in the modern world? Everyone's familiar with that equation, yeah? So, see, we're talking about fat loss and we're talking about health, then it's good to, so we know that fat loss is loss of actual fat tissue, okay? And not necessarily, well, not loss of muscle, okay? To keep it very simple, your scales are going to show fat and muscle, okay, added up together. Okay, obviously it's not taking into account organs and bone and whatnot, but those things are going to be more static in nature. Okay? So then it's good to look at what is health. So health can be defined as so many different things, and what Anna thinks of when she hears health is going to be different to what Benny thinks of. It's going to be different to what I think of. It's going to be different to what Basil thinks of. But generally, most people will agree it's going to be a lack of illness in the body to start off with. So it's going to be a lack of disease. We often use on our monthly check-ins, that probably, you'll get it on Monday, okay, for the month of January. So we use that circle of life, which I grabbed from my health coaching course back in the day, and that looks at all these different areas. So it looks at spirituality, creativity, finances, career, education, health, physical activity, home cooking, home environment, relationships, social life, and joy. So it is a very holistic look at it. You might not look at all those things. Maybe you define your health just on physical activity and spirituality, maybe, okay? It's going to be different for everyone. But there is definitely going to be a consensus that it's a lack of disease, a lack of illness. For me, when I think about it, I think about mood, energy, brain clarity, and overall performance. Okay? So when we're thinking about whether optimizing body composition and optimizing health, we need to understand that there is a lot of correlation between body composition and health, but it's not everything. Okay, you can still be not in your ideal body composition, and you can still be either define yourself or be defined by society or by doctors or whatever as healthy. Okay, it's not necessarily 100% hand in hand, but a lot of health markers improve if we are living in a certain range for our body composition. Okay, and this is where it says longevity with mTOR versus AMPK pathways. You know, this is something that we'll have a little bit more of a chat about later when we're talking about protein intake and talking about training and the effects that can have on longevity pathways as well. Okay, and how to balance those things. So what we're going to focus on for the next little bit is just looking at like an order of priorities when you're trying to optimize body composition. Okay, probably the majority of people here, okay, I would guess, because the majority of people in the world generally would like to be a little bit leaner and a little bit fitter or a little bit more muscle, okay, and feel a little bit more defined. Okay, no matter where you're at, if you could have it or not, most people would go a little more that way in some regard. So if we're trying to go a little bit more that way, this is the order of hierarchy that we really want to focus on. So what I mean by order of hierarchy is, I mean, until we're getting number one sorted, we don't need to worry about number two. Okay? Until we're getting number two sorted, we don't really need to worry about number three. Okay? And this is going to help simplify the process a little bit in terms of if you are trying to work your way towards improved body composition for you. Okay? And this is actually also if you're trying to put on muscle. So if you're trying to put on muscle, okay, especially the first 4 are going to be very similar. So we've got calorie balance, protein target, strength training, sleep, other movement, macronutrient balance, and then workout nutrition and timing. Okay, that's basically the order of focus. So what I want for this next little bit is for you just get a bit of an understanding about, think about where you're at in the process, okay, what you need to focus on, and then we want to talk about practical steps to make it happen, okay? So that first one, calorie balance, like I said, it's very undisputed that you need to have, if you're trying to lose body fat, okay, generally you need to have less calories in than calories out. If you're trying to put on muscle, then vice versa, more calories in than calories out. Okay, that's fairly undisputed. You'll still get people sitting on either side of the fence of saying, you know, you just need to focus on real food, don't worry about calories. No, calories are everything that matter. Have you guys heard like that sort of 2 schools of thought? So once again, there's rhyme and reason to the both. If we focus on real food, for example, in that debate, most of the time by focusing on real food, we're going to be eating less calories, okay? Because it's going to be more satiating. You're going to be getting basically more satiating, getting more nutrition out of the actual food and being more nourished and not needing so much food. So the main, I guess, issues with this, like most of you know this, but the main issues with it is knowing how much, right? Like how much do I need to be eating? Am I eating enough? Am I eating too much? Are my portions too big? Are my portions too small? How many times per day do I need to eat? And the beauty about this, the beautiful thing about this is that because this is our first priority, because of that thermogenic equation, we actually will be getting feedback. We're going to be getting feedback every day, every week, in terms of whether we're eating enough or not eating enough. And that's simply by using the scales. Okay, so the scales, in terms of if we're eating, let's say we're trying to lose body fat, okay? If we're trying to lose body fat and we're looking after some of these other priorities that I'm going to be talking about, and those scales are slowly going down, you're going to be in a calorie deficit. Okay, it's as simple as that. It means that you're currently in a calorie deficit. If your weight is steady, it means that you're pretty even. Okay, in versus out. If you're going up slowly over time, it means that your calories are a little bit higher. So there are ways, that is a very simple way without actually tracking calories to get that feedback. Some of the problems that I see with that is, number one, people taking one-off weights per week. So let's say you're just taking a weight on Friday morning. Okay, just taking one weight per week is not going to be 100% reflective of what your weight actually is, because every single day, even throughout the day, you're going to have fluctuations. Okay, fluctuations are going to come from the types of food that you're eating, the time of month for ladies, your training status, your inflammation status, even stress. You know, stress is going to play out on the scales in terms of generally a little more inflammation. So what we want to do to get a reflective feel of whether we are in the calorie deficit or in the calorie surplus is try and jump on scales more times throughout the week, okay, and then get an average. So instead of just taking it as a random number on a Friday, for example, you might do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Okay, if you're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're going to get 3 numbers, and then you can average that out. So let's keep it simple. Let's say Monday you're 100, Wednesday you're 101, Friday you're 102. It's been a good week. The average is going to be 101 for the week. Now you do the same next week. Okay, so if the next week, let's just say, you know, you're 99, 100, 101. Your average is 100 for the next week. So you can see that you've lost a kilo, so you can assume that you're actually in a pretty big, that would be a really big calorie deficit. Another problem, okay, so problem number one with that is taking a random ad hoc scale, weight, different scales, okay, very, very different times of day, very, very different context, before training, after training, very different once again, clothes, no clothes, very different, going to the toilet beforehand, not going to the toilet beforehand, very different. Another problem is making the scale weight mean more than just a number, okay, so because of all the stigma in our society in terms of what the media portrays as beautiful and, you know, all the stuff that we're showing every day, and also depending on your beliefs, like we went through in the mindset workshop, there can be extra baggage put onto the number in front of you on the scale. So you need to work with yourself if that is something that is an issue for you, okay? And you need to balance out getting that feedback versus looking at the scale. 100% agree on that. But we also want to just try and use it as one biometric feedback, okay? It's just a number, and you know that it's going to be up and down, okay, because of all these different things, because life is dynamic. But if we add on some other metrics to judge our progress, such as, what are some other things that we could use instead of just scale weight? Clothes, yep. So how your clothes are fitting, okay, that's another feedback mechanism. Mood, how's my mood each day comparing to before I was training? Confidence, energy, how well am I recovering? Brain clarity, how am I getting around each day? Okay, if we start looking at some other metrics as well as just using that as a one all and be all, then you're also going to be less likely to make that, you know, make it mean that you're a bad person if the scale goes up 1 week. All that means is that you're a little bit of a calorie surplus that week, and it gives you that feedback, okay, I'm eating a little bit too much. If I want to be losing body fat at the moment, I need to look at what I am doing. I need to try and change a few things. So it can be a very, very powerful tool because it can give us feedback as to where to steer to. Okay, does that make sense? Who in here, if you don't mind sharing, has an aversion to scales? Yep, cool. So that's totally like fine and totally normal as well. And like, you don't have to use scales, but if you are really wanting to change your body composition, it's going to be the quickest, most effective way. Because otherwise it's like, you know, it's like having a trying to have a budget but without knowing what your budget is. Like, that's pretty hard. Like, if you're overspending every week but you don't know you're overspending, you're going to probably be in the same spot as you are now financially as if you didn't have, you know what I mean? So, but if it is a really big issue, then we want to start looking at some other metrics for you. So body fat percentage, maybe you don't have as much of an emotional connection with. So body fat percentage can be done on the in-body machines that we use every 8 weeks, and that's also advantages and disadvantages. It's not as often, which can be good if you're prone to getting stuck up on numbers, even on the body fat, but not as good because you can't re-steer that horse as quickly. Okay, as if you're getting 3 to 5 scale weights per week, you can re-steer every single week. Okay, and then other metrics like measurements, clothes, and then so on. Okay, you're paying us now to walk through. So the other sort of thing with calories versus in versus out is you can't just keep on restricting yourself more and more and more. Okay, I've seen some people and they're trying to train, trying to get through on a busy job and stuff, eating like 700 calories a day. That is not doable. Okay, everyone has a certain what's called a basal metabolic rate, which is how many calories you need just for your vital organs to function. Okay, just to breathe, just to use some brain power. So what happens basically with the body is that it's always going to be resetting. Okay? The body is really, really stubborn. Okay? That's why it's so hard to actually put on muscle and to lose body fat, because it always wants to stay the same. Okay? It's called homeostasis. So if you start restricting calories and you're getting some fat loss, you know, you can only keep on going, and at some point your metabolism is going to start resetting a little bit because you have less body weight on you, so you're not going to be burning so many calories throughout the day, and therefore you're not going to be getting those same losses. Does that make sense? So let's say at the moment, let's just say I need 3,000 calories if I wanted to lose weight. That's a nice equation, eh? That's probably true for me. So if I keep on doing that, let's say I'm 90 kilos at the moment, if I keep on doing that and I'm losing weight every single week, let's say I get down to, make it really simple, 85 kilograms, and I've been eating 3,000 calories all the way along, at some point that 3,000 calories isn't going to be enough, or it's going to be too much for me to keep getting weight loss. So in that equation, what most people will do is they'll just keep on restricting calories until they start losing more and more weight, which is okay down to a certain point. But there's, like I said, I've seen some ridiculous numbers, and you can't just keep on starving yourself, right, to try and lose that weight. So that's where things like what's called a reverse dieting comes in, which is basically trying to go away from your deficit, slowly adding some more calories in, okay, until you're at more of a maintenance stage again, and then even going a little bit of a surplus for a little bit to give you your body a little bit of break, and then once again your body will become used to eating more calories again, okay, and then you can go in a deficit again. So if I got down to 2,500 calories, but I'm not losing any weight anymore, okay, maybe I just sit at 2,500 calories for a couple of weeks, and then I actually slowly increase it, okay, getting back up towards 3,000, so my body is now reset again. I'm just maintaining weight at 3,000 calories, okay, and then you can go back to a deficit from there. So you don't need to get too strung up on this process, okay. All I wanted to point out is that you can't just keep on restricting more and more and more, okay. But most of the time, if it's the first place you're starting, in terms if you are trying to lose body fat, that is the first place to start, okay, is looking at that calorie balance by looking at the scales. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to talk about this more practically towards the end, but I just want to try and give you sort of the hierarchy of focus. So if you are trying to optimize body composition, whether you're trying to put on muscle or whether you're trying to lose body fat, that would be the most, generally speaking, the most likely place to start, okay, is just getting that feedback on the scales. So number 2 is protein target, okay, so if you're getting that feedback on the scales and it's moving the direction that you want, so it's going down if you're trying to lose body fat, or it's going up if you're trying to put on muscle, okay, only then would I start worrying about the second one. Okay, and this is also for me, if I'm trying to put on muscle, I'll always just look at calories and my scale weight as feedback. That's normally as far as I go, to be honest. Okay, I don't even normally go to this step. But if I was going another step, then I'd start making sure that I'm getting enough protein in. So everyone's heard, like, it's so cliched in the fitness industry to eat protein. Okay, everyone here knows that. But I guess understanding why it is important, And it's really because, well, for a number of factors. Number one, if you are trying to lose body fat, protein is probably it is the most satiating macronutrient. Okay? So what that means is going to keep you really full. If you're trying to eat less, you want to feel full, right? You don't want to be hungry all the time. So that's the first reason. Number two is that if you're in a calorie deficit, so if the scale rate is slowly going down, we want to be having protein in there to protect, because it protects muscle tissue. Okay, remember what we spoke about at first, is that muscle tissue and body fat are the two metrics. We want to protect our muscle tissue, and generally most of us want to, if given a choice, lose body fat. Okay? So it protects muscle tissue. If you're trying to build muscle, okay, in a calorie surplus, then it's going to help you build muscle. So, hands up if you've ever got to this point and you've ever tried to track protein before. I know Rach has, yeah, Ollie, Noreen. What was your, what did you come up with when you did it? Were you surprised at how little you were eating, or?
Really can't eat that much protein.
Yeah. Yeah, so that is, like I said to Rach, that is yesterday, that is the probably biggest conclusion that people get out of it when they start tracking is, especially females, I think, just because, okay, it might be cliched again, stereotype, but generally, from my experience, guys will get into the meat a lot more if they're meat eaters, and ladies will generally, if they're thinking about nutrition, maybe stay more on lighter type foods rather than heavy meats and whatnot. So generally we want to try and get about 1 to 2 grams per kilogram that you weigh, okay? And that's whether you're trying to lose body fat or you're trying to put on muscle. So that means if you're a 90 kilo person, you want to be getting between 90 and about 180 grams of protein per day. Generally I'll go towards, if I was writing a meal plan, I'd go towards the 2 grams for 2 grams per kilo. But like I said yesterday to Rach, okay, if you do get to this point and you start seeing how much protein you're eating, let's say you're currently eating 60 grams of protein, okay, let's say you're a 60 kilo, or let's say you're a 90 kilo person, okay, and so you know that you can eat between 90 and 180 grams of protein per day, but you're only eating 60 grams at the moment. You don't need to go straight to the 180, okay, anything more is going to be better. Does that make sense? The other thing with protein is that it's very, very hard to find complete protein sources that aren't real food. Okay, if you think about all the snacks, all the processed food that we have, most of it is carbohydrate and fat, that combination. Okay? So if you're eating protein, then you're also covering another base in terms of most of the time you're eating like a nice whole food. Okay, if it's like a full protein source. So in terms of, we'll look at practical stuff with this towards the end, but always the most important thing is not what's happening on a given hour in a given instant, okay, it's what's happening for your week. So your calories across your week matter more than calories in a day, matter more than calories in an hour. Same with your protein. Okay? Protein across a week matters more than protein in a day versus protein in an hour. So, and that's sort of the same as training, right? Like we always talk about just being consistent over time. Okay? It's much better to be doing 3 sessions a week for a year rather than doing 5 sessions one week, 1 session the next week, and so on. Okay? So what matters is the total across the week. So I'm just going to keep working through this hierarchy. Just shout out any questions if you have any, and then we'll start talking about practical stuff, okay? So we've got about 3 people that have tracked protein before, is that right? Yeah. What do you guys use when you did track it? What are you using, Rach?
I weigh it on the scale, and
Yep.
I look up on Google how many protein grams
Yep.
are and whatever I'm eating.
Yep.
And then I keep it on a little piece of paper each day.
Yeah, cool.
It's a little bit.
Yeah,
It is.
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. We're gonna talk about that. Actually, just show of hands who had, so no one else has tracked like stuff before in an app or anything like that, going to that extent? No, cool.
I've done it.
That's good. Yeah, well, there's pros and cons, once again, to doing that. I think the biggest pro is education, right? Like, Rachel didn't know how small an amount of protein she was eating until she started weighing her food, or started weighing it and looking up on the Google. So that is the biggest advantage, is that education. I really, once again, I really like it to, if you're trying to change finances, right? You have a budget. If you know your budget, then you know what you're working within. If you have that, if you start tracking stuff, then all of a sudden you get that education. You know what 100 grams of protein looks like. You know what 500 calories looks like. You start seeing how your body responds to 2,500 calories a day, or 1,500, or 5,000, or whatever it is. Some people really enjoy, that tracking 24/7. To be honest, probably the most I've ever done is like 3 weeks, maybe. Okay, 3 to 4 weeks at a time. But even like that's enough for me to know pretty much, like, obviously I've studied this stuff a fair bit as well, but I know what's in most food, so I don't need to track it. And it also depends where you are, like in terms of like if you're using the scales to be getting that feedback and you're getting the results, then maybe you don't even need to go here. Okay? As like I said, if I ever try and go through stages of like, oh, I want to put on some muscle and put on some weight, all I'll track for a few days, or is my total calories in. I don't even look at the macros or the protein target. But that's also because I know that I get a lot of protein in every day, and I'll be hitting around about that amount anyway. Okay, so that would be the second priority. Third priority, we'll speed these up a little bit. Third priority is strength training, okay? And that's just because of what we spoke about, trying to preserve that muscle tissue, essentially, okay? Like you can definitely get weight loss on the scale without doing any sort of training, okay? If we just eat a little bit less than what you're putting out, okay, you can 100% lose weight on the scales. Okay? You don't need to be your training putting in all the hard work. But if you want to preserve muscle tissue and change your body composition and also get stronger and more mobile and everything, then we need that strength training in there to protect that tissue. Okay, and that muscle tissue is really one of the key things, one of the key factors in terms of being able to live like a long and fruitful life, right? Like there's so many people here, which is a good reflection of why, of being here, because they want to be still hiking when they're 70, 80 years old, and that's because you need that strength. But in terms of a body composition point of view, it just preserves muscle tissue. Okay, so strength training actually breaks down muscle tissue acutely. So straight after a session, you'll actually go into what's called protein degradation, where you're essentially losing muscle in those first few hours, but in the long term, it's building muscle tissue, okay, and building bone mass. So you're all here, so you've already got number 3 covered, okay? So that's one thing you don't need to worry about. Number 4, okay, is sleep. We went through a little bit of this in week 1, but essentially with your sleep, okay, sleep is really the main recovery process. We can be doing all these other things like foam rolling, doing all these awesome recovery classes, but if we're not sleeping, then we're losing out on like the lowest hanging fruit ever, okay? So we need to be getting a decent amount of quality sleep. And that's also in terms of body composition, in terms of hormone balance, okay? So in week 1, we spoke about leptin and ghrelin. Those 2 hormones are responsible for telling us that we're full and also telling us when we're hungry. Okay? When we don't sleep well, those get out of sync, so all of a sudden we need more food to fill us up, and we also don't, and we're also getting the signal more often that we're hungry. Okay, so that's a really simple one in terms of sleep, and there's also a lot of other markers just from even one night's sleep of, I think it was about 5 hours, 5 to 6 hours. Like you're actually classed, when they've done this in studies, and they've done it a lot, as pre-diabetic the next day because your insulin sensitivity is much decreased. Okay, so and then you get a couple of nights in a row, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Okay, that's when we start compiling these things on top of each other. Also, in terms of around sleep, cortisol. Cortisol is our main stress hormone. Okay, we need it. We spoke about it in week 1. We need it in our lives, but if it becomes chronically elevated, okay, which it generally will if our sleep is really poor, it is a stress hormone. It is the old signal that our bodies are in starvation mode, hold on to what we've got. Okay, so it is much harder to lose body fat. So we're talking about autohierarchy, but then obviously if there's one of these that is like a big, almost got the F-bomb there, like I'm not doing this at all, or this is really bad for me, maybe that might be a good place to start. Okay, so and remember that correlation between body composition and health. Like all of these are going to generally make you healthier, especially if you're not doing them. Okay. So the second last consideration, or third last, I think, is other movement. So NEAT is like a technical word for it, which is just non-exercise activity thermogenesis. All that is just the burning of calories, but that aren't exercise session. Okay, so movement outside of an exercise session. There's a really big genetic part on this as to how many calories you're burning throughout a day based on a gene that basically makes, those people that just can't stay still, so if they're sitting down, they've got to be fidgeting, they've got to be bouncing their foot. So, like Taryn, my partner, is a bit more like that. Like, it absolutely pains me if we sit down at night time after dinner to watch something or whatever. She'll get up like 5 times. I'm going to make a cup of tea, I've got to do this, got to do that. Like, just relax. So people have different genetic predispositions to how much they move, and also your body is so smart. If you're in a calorie surplus, you'll generally be fidgeting and moving around a little more, whereas if you're in a calorie deficit, you'll be more prone to not want to move. Okay, so once again, if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to be less fidgeting, therefore it's going to be a lot harder to be losing that weight again. So that body is stubborn, okay? So it's also very smart. But that is a really big difference. Like I said there, it can be up to about 900 calories difference from one extreme to the other. Okay, in a person that moves, naturally wants to move and fidget a lot. And I'm not even talking about someone that goes for a walk versus someone that doesn't go for a walk. This is like two people sitting at the office doing work next to each other. Okay? And the other part of this is how big effect, that's not a very good English, the massive effect that movement outside of the gym can make. Okay? If we're trying to lose body fat and we're just turning up at the gym 3, even 7 times per week, but the rest of the time we're sedentary, okay, that's going to have not nearly as big a effect on the scale weight and on the body fat percentage as even if you weren't coming to the gym, but you're a lot more active throughout the day. Okay, like back in the old days, we weren't sitting at desks, okay, but we also weren't going to gyms. Okay, but we weren't as a population overweight and obese like we are in the Western world today. And that's because we had things to do, okay? We had tasks to carry out throughout the day, more manual labor tasks. We were moving all day, and we didn't have to worry about going to a gym, okay? Because we're just naturally moving. So the effect that movement outside the gym can have is massive, okay? So don't disregard, going for those walks, parking a little bit further away from work, taking a meeting on a walk. All of these little things that can make a that add up to something really big. Number 6, and then we've just got number 7, so macronutrient balance. So who can be a star pupil and tell me the 3 macronutrients? Go, Fenny. Protein, carbs, and fats. Okay? So apart from alcohol, all of those, everything that we ingest will fall into one or most of the time, all of those categories somewhat. Okay, protein, carbs, and fats. They all have different functions. Okay, we generally do best with all of them. And so this is another place where I think a lot of people get stuck on, okay, and they get caught up on in terms of, we've talked about protein, so I'll put it number 2 because I'm a really big advocate and really believe that protein plays that higher importance. But then between carbs and fat, it's not as nearly important. Okay, the most important thing is just that calorie balance overall. They've done so many studies on looking at like a low carb diet versus a high carb diet, and all the extremes in between. And when you equal out calories, okay, the results are pretty much always exactly the same. Okay, there are some discrepancies. So I've put there, depending on like the ancestry, okay, it can play a little bit of a part. So let's say you've got a African ancestry, okay, you're more likely to have some genes that break down carbs really well. Okay, so you're going to be more prone to dealing with high carbs really well, versus if you're from like the North Pole, okay, your heritage is from that way, you're going to be more likely to thrive on a higher fat type diet and less carb type diet. Okay, but most of the time, calories in versus calories out is still going to look the same. So the most important thing is I put adherence. Okay, adherence is like a word we can use if you're following a plan, but you can also just use like consistency, and just going back to those first principles. Okay, so probably everyone in here will never, unless there's some other things we need to look at, like some autoimmune conditions do really well on lower carb diets. That's basically why the ketogenic diet, who's heard of the ketogenic diet? Yeah, that's pretty much why that was came about in the first place, because there was actually a lot of study and research was done on some of different sort of health conditions like epilepsy, Alzheimer's, maybe? Yeah, Alzheimer's, and a few other things. But for the majority of the population, and that's where money and stuff comes in. Like something is researched, like the ketogenic diet, it gets results for a small subset of the population for a certain reason, but then everyone thinks it's going to be the thing for them because it works for one person, but that one person's context is very, very different to ours. Okay? So most of you probably never need to get down to this point of looking at, or at least being worried about your macro balance. It's good to have a bit of understanding if you start tracking, but once you're getting that protein and your calories, most of these other principles, except for the sleep and the strength training, you're not really going to have to go there. And then especially on this last one, workout, nutrition, and timing. This is like, I said the difference for females between like maybe going from like 17% body fat, which is very lean for female, down to like 15%. So it's going to play a very small part. If you're preparing to do like a fitness competition, you would be worried about this. Or if you had all those other things down pat, they weren't causing you any stress, and you wanted to look at the next step, you could look at this. Okay. I sort of follow this roughly, but that's only because all those other principles I feel like I've got fairly covered. Okay? But it's going to be a very small piece of the puzzle. So what I'm talking about in terms of workout and nutrition is worrying about what you're having just before training, worrying about what you're having just after training, worrying about what you're having during training, that workout window. Okay, so yes, it plays a part. Yes, we talk about it sometimes, but all those other things in terms of body composition improvements are going to play the biggest parts in that. There is there could be an argument for this just in terms of how you're feeling throughout a session, okay, your energy throughout a session. But once again, if you look at the bigger picture in terms of what you're doing across the day, that's probably going to be more important. If you're coming into a session at 5 p.m. and you're feeling depleted, okay, is it because you haven't had your pre-training snack, or is it just because you skipped lunch and also had a shitty breakfast? Like, okay, you've got to look at it in a bigger picture. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So what, just out of interest, before we sort of go on to practical stuff, what I get the sense that most people are on step number 1 if they were going to start looking at things. Would that be correct, or
Yeah.
Benny maybe a little bit further down the list? Alright, so I forgot, before we get into practical stuff, we're going to go through some of these myths, okay? I think they're good to go through, and then you can ask me any more about these as well. So, who's heard that you need to do fasted cardio for fat loss? Yeah, cool. What does that even mean? That's a good place to start. So fasted cardio meaning doing cardio in the morning, but without eating beforehand. So turning up and or going for a run and trying to do some cardio work without losing stuff. That's like probably people that have done the round and circle gym game trying to lose weight. That will be like a well-known one. So you've heard of that, Noreen? Did you say you'd heard of that? Or fasted cardio? Yeah. So in terms of answering that, I'll go through it really quickly, but if most of you don't know what that is, then it's not too much point. But basically, if you're not feeding beforehand, then your session is going to be less intense. Okay, you're not going to be able to put the same intensity in because you don't have the fuel there to fuel it. And then it's just basically a cost-benefit ratio. Okay, if you're putting 100 calories in, say having a banana beforehand, is that going to but you're going to be able to exercise a lot harder, okay, and that difference is probably going to be more than 100 calories anyway. Okay, you're able to push a fair bit harder. So you definitely don't need it. Who's heard low carb is needed for fat loss? Great, yeah. So once again, like I said, okay, it's not needed. The main thing is calorie balance. Okay, there's been study after study done versus low carb versus high carb. But in saying that, when people switch to a lower carb diet, a couple of things will happen generally. Okay, so is everyone familiar with carbs? Like, you know what carbs are? So generally a couple of things will happen. One, you'll probably just eat less calories, okay? Because if you're trying to eat low carb, most of the time people will just take out bread, take out the pasta, maybe take out the rice, and won't substitute too much back in. Okay, maybe you pour a little bit more oil over, get a little more fat, but generally overall you're eating less calories. So you are going to be losing weight straight away if you take some calories out. Also, carbohydrate is stored in our liver and in our muscles as glycogen, okay, which is actually our fuel that we use if we're strength training, if we're doing higher intensity type movement. And when we take the carbs out, all of a sudden we're taking away the storage in the liver and of the muscles, so you're going to be losing a little bit of weight on the scale straight away as well, okay, because of that. But it's not actually real fat loss. Okay, you're just taking away some of your energy stores, okay, that you're going to be utilizing, that you could utilize later on. Which is why when you take carbs out, who's tried to decrease carbs before and felt like really flat? Maureen, yeah, great, yeah. So that's generally why you'll feel really flat and lethargic, is because you've got no glycogen stores to power you for that exercise, okay? You can get away with doing low intensity things because you don't use glycogen for those low intensity movements, okay? you need to be on a diet for fat loss. Okay, so we've just spoken about the main principles to focus on. So you could be in a calorie deficit and you don't have to be in a diet. Okay, you can eat however you normally eat. If the scale weight's going down, then you're getting a result. Okay, it doesn't mean that you need to be on a diet per se. And a diet can be a very loose term. I like to think it as a diet as more of a plan. Okay, so most people want to be told what to do. They want to be told what to eat, but that doesn't really teach you much on your body, right? So we try and follow these principles of what we've gone through instead. So then it gives the power back to you. A couple more. Okay, this is one that we sort of spoke about. So you need to weigh your food and track your food forever. Okay, that would suck. I couldn't do it. But I do really think there is a positive component to that in terms of education. If you've never done it before, okay, there is a really, really strong bit of education there in terms of just knowing what you're putting in your body. Okay? So I do generally recommend people start tracking just for, it can be 2, 3, if you've done it for 4 weeks, you're going to pretty much cover all bases in terms of, you know, the way that you normally eat. You know, most people don't eat the same thing every single week, so if you do it for 4 weeks, most of the time you'll get a pretty good feel for it. And it's also enough time, 4 weeks, if you're looking at your scale weight, to start getting a bit of a reflection of, okay, this week I averaged 2,500 calories and my weight went up a little bit. Okay, this week I'm averaging 2,200 calories and my weight was here. So it's enough time to start getting some feedback in terms of how many calories you sort of need, and also start getting some feeling of what 2,000 calories or 3,000 calories or whatever feels like. Okay. I thought myth, it is tiresome to track and weigh your food. Yeah, that's not a myth. Okay. It is very tiresome, which is why the majority of people don't want to do it, and the majority of people avoid it. But if you're here and you're wanting to change your body composition, what we've done in the past hasn't worked. And most of the time what we've done in the past hasn't worked because we don't have the education to know where to go with it, right? We're guessing. But always refer back to the money. It's just the same as that. Okay? If you don't know where you stand in that sense, you can't move forward. Another myth, there are good foods and bad foods. Okay? That sort of plays back into the mind games of the scales. Like, you know, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, depending on what it is in front of me. I really like to just think of food as giving the body information. So what information are we giving the body? Are we giving it good information, or are we giving it less than ideal information? Okay? It doesn't. If we victimize foods, okay, we're going to be more likely to go in those cycles of beating ourselves up if we eat something that we class as bad, and then, you know, going down certain pathways of making ourselves feel guilty and guilty or whatever, and just going around in those circles. So I really believe like moderation. Okay, that's sort of the type of guy I am, pretty vanilla, pretty average overall, not too extreme. But I really believe moderation is the key, because if we say that we can't have a certain thing, okay, either it'll make us want that certain thing more, or we'll victimize ourselves when we have it. And if we were following some sort of plan, then we'll go, screw the plan, I just had that piece of brownie, I've ruined it all, okay, I'm back over here. Which is why also getting an average scale weight is really good for the week, not just taking a one-off scale weight, because it is going to fluctuate. Okay? So if you know that if you went to a dinner party and you had more than what you'd normally like to have, okay, not a big deal. Maybe your scale weight's up a little bit the next day, but then you just keep on following the same principles for the rest of the 80% of the time, and overall for the week, you're still down that little bit. Okay? So really trying to take away that mentality of good foods and bad foods. But in saying that, obviously food is information, and we want to be giving the body information. Okay? We want to be giving it good information, and that good information generally comes from whole foods. Okay? So foods that our ancestors could have eaten. Okay? Foods from the ground, foods from the air, foods from the sea. What's the other one? Fruits from the trees. Yeah, so we're trying to take ourselves out of that cycle. And then sort of align with that as well, the myth that there are magic foods or supplements that help you lose weight. Okay, maybe there's a couple of supplements or extracts or something that might give you the 0.05% each in terms of a little bit more of a thermogenic effect or something, but that's like, that would be, in the order of hierarchy, that would be number 27 on the list, okay? And most of us are stuck with number 1, so we don't need to worry about that, okay? Most supplements and whatnot that say, have this and you're gonna lose 5 kilos or whatever, it's all just marketing BS, okay? Or if it's a juice diet and it's going to make you lose that, yeah, because you're having 100 calories a day, okay? Where'd I put the room?
What about machines?
Machines, same thing. Machines, any magic machines? It's just calories in versus calories out. Once again, maybe this is really hard work and it makes it burn some more calories than normal. Maybe it's going to help preserve muscle tissue in those areas, okay? But there's no magic machines, okay? Sorry to say. So once again, all those morning shows, that's where most of them are, isn't it? So some common themes across any sort of diet or any sort of school of thinking around nutrition. Whole foods mostly, so whether we're talking ketogenic diet, who's heard of carnivore diet? That's sort of been a thing in the last year or 2 or 3. Carnivore diet, Mediterranean diet, whatever it is, okay, vegetarian, vegan. The main commonality is that most of them, in a purest sense, have you focusing on whole foods. Okay, there's not too many diets except for marketing ones that have you, eating whatever, a brownie for every meal as your main thing. Okay, it's normally based on foods out of the ground, your veggies, fruits from the trees, meats from the animals. Okay, so that's definitely a commonality. Removal of foods that you're intolerant to. So trying to have some awareness, maybe keeping a food diary, and removing things that don't sit 100% well with us. Okay? Foods that don't sit 100% well with us will generally cause inflammation in the body. We know when we're inflamed, we hold a little bit more water in the body, scale weight's going to go up a little bit. We're also going to feel a little bit shitter, and just not as much brain clarity as well if we're inflamed, and generally can create longer term problems in the gut as well if you keep on smashing your gut with those foods. Okay? And then removal of calorie-rich drinks. So mostly in terms of liquids, focusing on water, maybe teas and coffee. That's all we really need. Okay? Well, water is all we need. In terms of water, who thinks they drink enough? Definitely putting my hand down on that. Yeah, cool. So, as a very rough guide, that equation is a good starting point. So, a third of your body weight divided by 10. Okay, so if you're 100 kilos, that's 33 divided by 10, 3.3 meters. Okay, but that's before you add in any exercise or any other sit in the sauna or any extra sweat loss. I the biggest part of that for me is making sure I have a bottle with me. If I don't have a bottle, then it's half of what I meant to or should probably be drinking. Okay. So, getting close to close, you can start thinking of that practically. Okay, so I think we've established where you're at in that hierarchy, whether we're up at number 1 or whether we're maybe looking at the protein target. You've all got number 3 covered in terms of strength training. Sleep, you've all been aware of sleep. We've been humming about you at sleep for a long time. So most of you are number 1 and number 2. So we need some sort of framework in terms of, let's say we're at number 1, of how we're going to execute it. So the first part, going right back to the fundamentals, is having some sort of framework to make sure that we are organised so we can follow through with some sort of plan. Okay, so I talk about this 4-step process a bit. You might have heard me talk about it. So number 1 is planning. Okay, so actually this could be done on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, whatever works for you, it doesn't matter. But what I mean by planning is having some sort of idea of what you're going to be eating. Okay? Maybe it's waking up in the morning and planning out your day. Okay, I'm going to have this for breakfast, I'm going to have that for lunch at work, I'm going to have that for dinner. Or maybe it's mapping out the whole week, or maybe you do the same thing on every Monday, the same thing on every Tuesday, it doesn't matter. Okay? But having some sort of plan, and then actually scheduling time for all of these. Okay? So it seems basic, but a lot of people won't put in time to do their shopping. If you don't do your shopping, then you're not going to be able to eat the food, the food that's going to be aligned with how you want to eat, and hopefully working towards getting the result that you want with your body composition. So we need time in our week to shop. Once again, whether it's we do most of ours on a Sunday, and then Taryn every other day. Lots of females loving going to the shop, so let's not get it. Time for cooking, okay? Whatever that means for you. Maybe it's really extensive, maybe it's putting a bag of frozen peas in the microwave, okay? But whatever cooking means to you, so time for that, and then time for eating, okay? And even just time for eating, it seems so simple, but hands up if sometimes when you're at work, you just either forget to eat or you don't have time to eat. Couple of you, yep, okay. So just that alone, scheduling time to eat can be a really powerful thing, and you're going to be a higher chance of following through on whatever plan you do put in place. In terms of order of hierarchy for tracking alone, so the first priority would just be getting that scale weight average, okay, unless you've got a bigger version to the scales. And if you do have a bigger version to the scales, 2 options: either work on that in terms of asking yourself why, okay, and trying to get to those beliefs about yourself, sort of like we went through in the mindset workshop, and trying to debunk those, or look at some different methods. Okay, so that would be the first one. Second one, if you want to add on a layer, then look at just trying to get a protein source at each meal. Okay, so not worrying about weighing your protein, okay, just simply trying to have some sort of protein source at your meal times. So trying to, okay, it's breakfast, what can I have at breakfast protein-wise? Okay, I'm gonna have a few eggs, that's my protein source. Lunch, okay, I know I've got rice, I know I've got veggies, but I need to get a protein source in there. Okay, I'm gonna have a piece of fish. Okay, so that would be the next consideration. And then if you want to go to the next layer, then I would go to that full shebang for a little while of tracking your calories and your macros completely, all your macros. So you can use including weighing, okay? So that's going to be the full shebang, which is going to be a lot more commitment from your behalf. But just like anything, the more commitment you have, then the more return you'll probably get, okay, from it. And once again, like I said, whatever step you're on, it doesn't need to be forever. Okay, it's a tool in your path, in your journey to get into where you want to get to. If you are going down the C route, so that means you're doing the scale weight average. You've already been getting protein source at each meal, okay, or we've been favouring that. And then if you want to be adding that layer, you're tracking calories. Using things like Chronometer is really good. It's a really good app with a C, Chronometer. MyFitnessPal is a really widely used one. MyFitnessPal is really easy to use, but it's also, you can make up your own foods in there, and they're not like peer reviewed. So Anna could have a food. Let's say she, I don't know, it's a banana and egg omelette, like I made for Kai this morning. It's pretty good. I had half of it. And she says that's when she's worked it out, she's weighed the banana and stuff like that, or chosen a banana. She's worked it out and put it in at 600 calories. Yeah. If Rach then makes a banana and egg omelette because it sounds so good, maybe she makes hers completely different, but because MyFitnessPal says 600 calories, it's 600, whereas hers might be 900. Okay, so it's not as accurate, but it's really easy to use, which is obviously going to be a lot better than not doing anything. Okay, but Chronometer, MyFitnessPal, they both have free versions. There's a couple of others that are like a small amount of money that are quite good as well. But that would be like the order of hierarchy that I would use going away from today if you did want to start looking at making some changes with that. What do we got next? Who's got questions around this? How many times per day should you eat? Everyone comfortable with what they do? Like there used to be a big push, I guess, in like the fitness realm to you need to be eating 6 meals a day because you're going to increase your metabolism. The truth of the matter is that yes, you do burn a small amount of energy digesting food, especially protein. Okay, but the overall effect is very, very minor. What's more important is just sticking to what works best for you, okay? And what works best for you in terms of your lifestyle, so in terms of, you know, when you like to wake up, when you like to go to work, what sort of time and flexibility do you have at work, when do you train, when do you, when do you like to feel sharp in terms of your thinking, when do you like to, you know, all of these things are way more important than the small amount of extra calorie burn that you'll have from digesting and breaking down that food. Okay, so don't get too stuck in terms of how many times per day you're eating. What is once again more important is your total calories and your total protein. If you have to eat 4,000 calories in a day to put on muscle, it's very hard to do in one meal. Okay, I'd have to sit down for an hour and a half like an old Roman god and just have a platter of food in front of me, which sounds pretty good actually, and just gorge myself. But I would be not very likely to be able to digest all that amount of food very well either. Okay, so and also if I was having to get, say, 200 grams of protein per day, that's a lot of protein in one meal as well. So the most important thing is just what's happening across the total day. Okay, if you want to get finessey with it, then you want to be, however meals you're having, you want to fairly roughly break up, especially your protein portion. So let's say you had to get 100 grams of protein per day was your goal, and you're having 3 meals. Ideally, have around about 30 grams of protein at each meal. Okay, and that's just to keep us what's called protein synthesis, where we're sort of preserving or putting on muscle for longer. Okay, does that make sense? So you always just want to be thinking, when you're looking at information, what is the context, what is important to me, what do I need to focus on? Okay, you can see today that you're in a really nice spot. It's like when you start doing strength training, Okay, you can do anything, you're going to get a result. Okay, with this, all you need to do is focus on, for most of you, principle number one, getting some feedback in terms of calories in versus calories out, and you do that, and you're probably going to get a result. Okay, whether you're trying to put on muscle or trying to lose muscle. Okay, and that means all that other noise you can pretty much forget about until a later time, until you need it. And that's same with fasting protocols. Okay, there's fasting protocols. Somebody who's tried different types of fasting before. Benny has a bit. Yeah. Anyone else? No. Cool. So I'll let go into that.
I'm curious.
Yeah. Oh, fasting. Sort of, it's been, I guess, popularised a lot in the last few years. Once again, because a subset of the population has used it, and they've tried to extrapolate it into a, one size fits all. So it's just you can have time restricted fasting. So like 16 and 8 means that for 16 hours you're not eating of the day, and 8 hours you have an eating window. Okay, so that might be having your last meal at 8 o'clock at night, and then you're not eating until 12 o'clock the next day. Okay, so you've got a long period of time without eating. There's arguably some what's called autophagy benefits to that. So autophagy is basically a process of like cell cleanup. So we have a lot of like dead cells, or a lot of dead sort of remnant cells in the body. And it's a clearing out of that, okay, which can potentially help protect it against, the cells going bad and turning into things like cancer, for example. Okay, 20 and 4, exactly the same, but it's 20 hours without eating, 4-hour eating window. The other positive effect for that is if you are trying to lose body fat or trying to lose weight, if you've only got 4 hours in the day to eat, you're going to be less likely to eat as many calories, right? Because you're restricting yourself in a window. Okay? There's a warrior. I used to do the warrior sometimes, and that's just a dinner to dinner. I only did it one day per week. So like Saturday night you have dinner, and then you eat again until Sunday night. So it's 24 hours, but it's just that gorging out at night time, working, ploughing the land, rounding up the animals during the day. Okay, once again, you're not going to eat as many calories. It's a really, really nice long time for digestion to get a break. Okay, so it can also work well. We talked about autophagy effects, but it's also, if you do have any like digestion problems, it can help relieve that in the long term as well. Because let's say you're always eating a food that you're a little bit intolerant to, and you're just hammering your intestines with that, okay, there's going to be less chance of it always being inflamed with you eating less often. But once again, the main benefit of it for the majority of people is just, once again, less calories in and less calories out. Okay? There's not a lot of other magic science really to it. One other thing to consider before we go on is that AMPK versus mTOR pathway that I mentioned at the start. Basically, all you need to know is that in terms of like longevity research, so longevity in terms of living longer, there is some research coming out that we want to be spending more time in what's called the AMPK pathway, which is basically activated when we're going longer periods without food, when there's small amounts of our stress because we are going times either in a calorie deficit or fasting times, okay? Versus the mTOR pathway, which is activated when we're basically eating protein very often. Okay, so there is a balancing out effect in terms of trying to change body composition, and we know more muscle is also going to give us more function in later life, versus becoming too extreme on the bodybuilder mentality, I would call it, and losing some possible benefits that they're starting to discover in terms of activating those pathways for longevity that are activated when we go longer periods without food. But once again, it's very context-based. All of you in here, none of you have got to the point where you're smashing protein every 2 hours, okay? And the biggest struggle for you is just getting to 2 grams per kilo, or even 1 gram per kilo. So you're going to be so far away from being too much time in those mTOR pathways that potentially have some negative effects on longevity if you're in there constantly all the time for all your life. Okay, versus if I had a group of bodybuilders in front of me, okay, and we were talking about longevity, that might be a conversation more. Okay, we need to balance these things out. We need to start spending a bit more time on these other pathways instead of just trying to be in this anabolic pathway all the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Not really. How can I explain it better? So basically, it's just what I'm saying is there's some benefits to having less protein and less food overall, whether that's through fasting or whether it's just through smaller meals. There are some benefits to that in terms of longevity, but there's also there's some benefits of that versus making sure that we're getting the 2 grams of protein in all the time. But it's very context-based is what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is that if you're really struggling to even get to like 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilo, and most of you are just strength training, you know, a handful of times per week, I would be focusing more, especially if you also want to change body composition, focusing more on the pathways that we've spoken about. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that there is this other side of research as well that's in terms of just living longer and longer and longer. There's benefit to going times where we're going through more of a starvation mode and not feeding ourselves protein all the time. Does that make sense? So, a little bit of a summary before we have some questions. Health and body composition are linked. I didn't go into a lot of research, but most lifestyle diseases are more negligent when we are that healthy body composition, but they're not 100% dependent on each other. To lose body fat, we need to focus on the basics. Okay, so we just need to focus on where we are in terms of the hierarchy, not worry about all this other marketing stuff that grabs our attention and it looks like it's a magic shiny pill that's going to help us with everything, or the magic machine. Just focus on where you're at. Like I said, pretty much like I've been doing this for close to 20 years in terms of like training and thinking about this stuff. I still pretty much only ever think about number 1. Okay, so it gives you a little bit of context, but I have also worked through those other things before, so I have an understanding of how much protein I'm getting naturally, how much carbs I'm getting and stuff like that. Okay, so I've done that work. What's your weak point? Start here. So like I said, if you've got, if your sleep is absolutely horrible and you're already strength training, and yeah, maybe you have a bit of an idea of scale weight, then maybe you're better off starting on sleep. Okay, so just identify your weak point, and also identify your weak point on that 4-step plan in terms of the plan, the shop, the cook, and the eat. So what lets you down throughout the week? Is it that you don't know what to buy when you go shopping? Is it that you just don't have time to go shopping, scheduled in? Is it that you don't have a scheduled time at work to actually eat? Okay, so know what your weak point is there and then focus on that component, which is going to be like the habit to start setting the other things in, the clock's turning, okay? And then only, just work away from priority 1 and don't even worry about the others until you've got that nailed, okay, like I keep on saying. And then set up a habit creation environment, like we spoke about with the mindset. So James Clear's sort of frameworks around that. If you're trying to make changes, okay, make sure the environment is supportive of it, take away any barriers to it. So if you know that you're going to be doing tracking you want to start tracking your food, make sure you have kitchen scales that are really reliant and that are easy to use. Make sure that you have time available to do that stuff. Okay? Take away any barriers that are going to make it hard. You know, if the barrier is the batteries run out really quickly for the scales, make sure you've got more batteries on hand all the time. Okay? Get some accountability, whether it's with a housemate, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with us at the gym, whatever it is. Try and create that environment for you to start doing those things. The last one I know is questions. So I just want you to ask anything that's on your mind about either anything that we went through or anything at all outside of what we went through. Yo, Penny first.
Keto diet? What's the high protein?
Ketogenic diet is really high fat. Yeah, so it's meant to be like, I think like 70% fat. So what that means is if you're having 2,000 calories a day, like 1,400 of your calories should be coming from fat. Okay, and then it's actually meant to only be small to moderate protein. But what a lot of people do when they say they're on a ketogenic diet, they eat a very high protein diet. Okay, because meat, they eat meat. Okay, but not all meat is high fat. And part of that is because protein, when ketogenic diet was made for things like epilepsy, protein still elevates glucose and insulin response. Okay, not quite as much as carbs, but it still has that. Whereas fat won't do that. And in those populations, they would try not to elevate the glucose pathways. So it's typically meant to be really high fat. Yeah, so like fatty cuts of meat, egg yolks, lots of butter, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Question around when you start tracking your weight. I think I heard somewhere a long time ago that muscle weighs more than fat. So if you're training lots, you're building muscle, then you'll start, like you won't lose weight if you're putting on muscle. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you're, okay, let's say, and this is where we need to differentiate between losing body fat versus losing weight, okay? Because the scales, let's just say this is your weight. Okay, if you start strength training, yes, maybe your weight stays the same, so your scale weight is staying the same, okay? You're frustrated because it keeps on saying whatever, 72 kilos, 72 kilos. Your strength training, so it's potential that you've lost some body fat and you've put on a little bit of muscle, definitely potentially. But if you're eating less calories in than calories out, generally your weight will still be going down. Okay, so if your weight is staying the same, then generally you're like in maintenance calories. Does that answer? No, I'll add more to it than that.
No, I think it does, because I just assumed that if you're, if I went with my assumption, it would be, oh, it's fine if my weight's the same because I must be building muscle, but I'm hearing you say that actually no, even if you're building muscle, you're going to go down.
Well, you can still be losing body fat. Yeah, you can be losing body fat and be putting on muscle 100%, and your weight is staying the same, okay, but there's a piece I'm trying to get to and I can't quite get to it. What am I trying to get to? So, I've like got this thing in here and I can't get it out. I'll come back to that in a second, okay? Yeah, just remind me, Nori, that it'll come to me what I want to say.
How many calories out do you know?
Yeah, that's a good question. How many calories out do you know they're downing? It's very, very hard. Okay, there's sort of metrics that you can use. So there's metrics in terms of if you're doing strength training, you're burning approximately this. You can use things like trackers and stuff like that. There's different trackers They're generally very inaccurate, up to about 30% inaccurate. But you don't really need to know, because you don't need to know, because if your scale weight is going down, then you're putting more out than what you're putting in. Does that make sense? That's pretty much the benchmark. Okay, so if you know, you can reverse engineer it. It gets a little bit tricky in terms of working out how much of a deficit you're in, by how much weight you lost for the week. But let's say you know, because you started tracking your food, that you're eating 2,500 calories per day, and you do that every day for a week, and you lose half a kilo that week. You can actually, half a kilo is the equivalent of 3,500 calories. So you can actually work out on average how many calories out you're burning each day, but you don't really need to know. Yeah, all you need to know is if the scale weight is going down, then your output is more than your input. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's simplified.
Yeah, it just simplifies. No, you don't. No, you don't. If I was writing a meal plan for you and I was setting your calories, I would use certain equations to help me set that equation at the start to go, okay, Anna needs to eat 2,000 calories a day. But even with all those equations, they're all assumptions. Like the biggest assumption of that is we use what's called an activity index calculator. And based on what I think you do in terms of your work, how many times per week you're training, the intensity that you train at, how much movement you do outside of the gym, I come up with this number that I multiply the BMI and stuff times to try and give you this magic number to hit. But that has got so many assumptions in it that your best feedback is just from what we spoke about, looking at scales and then getting that feedback. Because even if I write a meal plan for someone, because of that equation, I still need them to track their weight, because I might set someone on 2,500 calories, I think that's going to be in deficit, but actually they start putting on weight. Because maybe they're only used to eating 1,500 calories a day, then all of a sudden I'm giving them 1,000 more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you don't even need to worry about that. Yeah. Yeah.
The number of calories that you should be eating. Number that
That I should be eating.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
You go about that.
Yeah, oh, how do you, so, well, that's what I was just talking about. You can go through, to get a very basic way of getting a baseline is doing your weight times 22. So let's say you're 100 kilos. I'm not saying you're 100 kilos, don't worry.
It's nice.
Let's just get that out on the table.
I might be, I don't weigh myself.
That would be your BMI, sorry, which is how much you need just if you're lying in bed not doing anything. Okay, so that would be 2,200. But then we use like an index depending on, like I was saying to Anna, in terms of how active you are. So the indexes that we use is like 1.2 to 2. So this is like someone that's sedentary, that doesn't train, and 2 is like someone that's like a bricklayer and is really physically active all day and might do some training as well. So then what you do with that is times wherever you fit in that spectrum to that. But that is such a loose spectrum. Okay, so that's once again the most accurate way to do it is to go back to getting that feedback on the scales. But it's probably not a bad thing just to do 22 times your weight and making sure that you don't go too much below that number. Okay? Because that's going to be, if you're just that number and then all of a sudden you get out of bed and actually live a life as well, all of a sudden you're already going to be in a deficit. Unless you've been starving yourself for a long period of time, because remember the body will reset. Does that make sense?
And that's calories, right?
That's calories, yeah.
And coming back to kind of the weight, fat versus
Yeah.
muscle, like, I would assume that putting on muscle is a much slower process than taking off fat.
Yeah, generally if you're losing body fat, like depends on where you're starting at, depends on what your training history is, your history, all of that. Generally you're looking for like 300 to 500 grams per week. That's on the scales. if you're covering those other bases with protein and strength training, then most of that's going to be body fat. Whereas if you're building muscle, yeah, generally like 150 to 250 grams per week is more number if you're putting on muscle. Yeah. But also depends on what your predisposition is. Like you can see, I'm naturally tall and skinny, so I find it much easier to lose body fat if I had to, okay, versus someone that comes from has different genetics and they might naturally hold a bit more weight, okay. So there's individual differences as well. Ooh, that's a good question. Can you just lose fat in one area of the body? You can't target like where you lose fat from, so you can't just go, okay, I want to lose fat from my bum or from my arms or whatever. It'll generally depend on your body shape as to where you lose it first. Like generally, women will store body fat around here for childbearing purposes. That'll be generally like the hardest places for it to come from, whereas guys will generally store more here. And generally that'll be the last thing, because bodies are stubborn and want to stay the same.
Is that the same goes with muscle building?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with muscle building, definitely you can, that's 100% different, like you can bias your training to focus on different areas, right? So if you're just doing squats 5 days per week, you're not going to put on so much muscle in your upper body, but you're going to put on more muscle in the lower body. And then also the how much stimulation you can, how much mind-body connection you can have to a muscle as well. So the more control you have of the muscle, you'll generally be able to put more muscle on in that area. And a good guidance of that is how sore you get in a certain area. Like for me, I can get sore, it's really sore in like my lats, and they seem to grow really easily. Whereas, so it depends on that mind-muscle connection with that. Anything else, guys?
Protein, like amino acid in meat versus, I guess, meat.
Yep.
Like is it...
So meat is like a complete protein, so there's about 20 amino acids. So when you get a complete protein source, it means they've got all of those 20 amino acids in there. Each amino acid has different qualities in terms of what it gives us. Okay, so meat, whey protein, powder, they're both complete protein sources, whereas things non-meat ones are normally not complete protein sources, so they don't have the full spectrum of all those amino acids. And also the grams of protein per grams of food is not as high. Yeah. And just before we finish, coming back to Maureen, so it is if you're starting out with strength training, even if you're in even if your calories are it's possible to lose body fat and put on muscle at the same time. Okay, like in those rookie stages, the more you train, then the more focused you need to be. So if you're trying to put on muscle, then you need to be, you're going to be more effective going into a calorie surplus, okay, versus, or trying to be in a deficit. So if I'm trying to put on muscle, I really need to go above and beyond what I normally eat, so I have those resources to make muscle. Whereas if you're just starting out, you can almost do anything, and you'll get those awesome results of losing a little body fat and putting on a bit of muscle. Okay, you don't need to be as focused on going above or below. Does that make sense? Cool. Thanks for watching, guys. I just I know sort of like the bit we went through, and obviously a lot of it was not you don't need to focus on, but hopefully that doesn't mean that it's not relevant, that you learned something and that you now know that you don't need to worry too much about what other areas that you're not on. That's the main thing that when you get from it is just to try and clear out some clutter, and yeah, so you can move forward from there with a bit more clarity, hopefully. Cool.
Thanks, Luke.